Well, good afternoon. Thank you everyone for joining us. I'm Rebecca Garber, Special Education Program Support Teacher and Transition Specialist for the School District of Janesville. And is this our fifth or sixth? Fifth, okay. In our Transition Talks Tuesday meeting, we have one more after this. And today we have the pleasure of hearing from Angela Bouton, who is going to talk to us about CLTS, Children's Long-Term Support. And you might ask yourself, what has that got to do with transition? Well, they can be instrumental in supporting students to transition into 18 plus options and services that are available. Part of it is going to be hearing about that, but we're excited to hear about this excellent service that a lot of our students use up until and beyond their high school years. That's it for me. And Angela, I'm going to let you take over at this point.
Thank you, Rebecca and Tim, for having me today. So I'm Angela Bouton, and I am, as Rebecca said, from Children's Long-Term Support or CLTS. So I'm going to share a slide presentation in just a moment. And so I'm going to do a brief overview of CLTS, just a quick overview of what it is, what it's like to be involved with CLTS. And at the end, there's a transition slide. So we'll talk a little bit about how we can help support transition in that, phase. Mhm. Okay. So Children's Long-Term Support, CLTS, is a Medicaid home and community-based waiver program. So what that means is in Wisconsin, the state of Wisconsin uses state and federal dollars to help kids who are eligible for our program. Um, and we provide comprehensive supports in the home and community. And we'll talk a little bit about what that is. Um, and I'll just say this as a caveat, I think most people here are from the Rock County area. So I'm going to speak about, CLTS and intake and things that are primarily with Rock County. However, throughout the state of Wisconsin, we'll talk a bit about that in a little bit, but there might be some nuances that are a little different in some areas. But um, we really strive to be, uniform throughout the state. So most of this will be applicable throughout Wisconsin. Um, let's see. So we'll talk about eligibility. So some core values that really encompass CLTS is really helping kids and families who are eligible for our program really enhance, physical and mental health. We're really help support health and safety, helping kids live their best life in their community through a flexible service system that's really within a partnership with families and providers. Um, Talk a little bit about eligibility requirements of CLTS. So um, for CLTS, one of the requirements is that children who receive our services reside in Wisconsin. And it's really a unique program because if you are enrolled in CLTS and you move to another county in Wisconsin, we're going to help you transition to that other county. You don't lose services. If you move out of the state of Wisconsin, that would be different because you have to have Wisconsin Medicaid. And having Medicaid is one of the requirements of the program. And when people are coming through the intake door, we can help that participant find the right kind of Medicaid for what they would need. There's different kinds of Medicaid. They all serve the child in the same way, but how somebody might get that type of Medicaid is going to be very different. And we're going to help somebody walk through that process. there's an age requirement. So we serve kids from age birth through 22. If a youth who's 18 is eligible for adult long-term care, they do transition to adult long-term care. But if they weren't eligible for adult long-term care, but they were eligible for our program, we can serve somebody up until the age of 22. See, they live in their home or eligible community setting. So that could look a little different in different ways, but we serve kids in the community as opposed to a residential setting. And that is one of the purposes of home community-based waivers. The other requirement is to meet eligibility level of care. So that is done through the intake process, and then annually every year, we have either program specialists, those are intake specialists, or a support and service coordinator meet with the participant and their family in their home, and they gather information. If it's a new intake, we're going to gather new medical records. If it's school records, and talk about what goes on in daily life. So we're going to gather all of that information, both at intake and eligibility. And so we serve kids in one or more of 3 target groups. Those target groups are developmental, physical, or emotional disabilities. And one thing I do say, if somebody's just starting out and they're concerned about what their diagnosis may be or may not be, but maybe they don't know if they have one, maybe because or would this type of diagnosis qualify? If somebody feels like our services would be helpful, you can go ahead and refer, and we'll talk about the referral process in a minute. I guess I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but sometimes people wonder about that, but then through medical records or something like that, we do find a diagnosis. And so, and if they don't have a diagnosis and they're not eligible, we're going to help kind of walk them through. Here's some ideas that you might want to look into, and you can always come back. And so I talked a little bit about the referral process. This is how you can make a referral in Rock County. This is where each county is a little different. If somebody is residing in another county, they would go to their county contact to make a referral. But in Rock County, this is there are a couple different ways of how you can make a referral. One is by phone. This is our dedicated referral phone number. And we have people answering that live Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. And then voicemails can be left outside of that time too. We have an email, so somebody can email this email, and intake staff will call them back and start walking that parent guardian through that process, or individual too, if they're over 18. And I do want to note too that we do have staff who are bilingual, and we can also, get translation services. We also ask at intake if there's any communication needs that somebody might have. Whether that's different types of communication, large print, whatever that looks like, we can help accommodate anything that would be helpful for communication-wise. So this is a little bit about, so now we've gone through the intake and eligibility process. The youth is eligible. What does that mean to have a support and service coordinator, or SSC? SSC is the acronym that we use for support and service coordination. And these are our SSCs, like case managers, if you will, that help participants and their families walk through meeting goals and what services are going to be helpful for those goals, to meet those goals. How do we help find service providers and coordinate with other entities that the child and family are involved with. That could be school, that could be DVR, that could be lots of different informal supports. People can have whoever they want at the intake meeting. They could have, um, you know, whoever they find helpful on their team. And so SSC, Support and Service Coordinator, is going to help that participant and family um, locate those, services that they need. They're going to talk about their goals, because this is a very goal-focused program. And it's really a one-size-fits-one program, meaning like every child's goals are going to be very different and every child's services are going to be very different. And so we help families kind of walk through that. I like that we talk about SSC as a connector and a facilitator. When we are not the central decision-making person, that is really the team, the parent, the child, in that team process. And yeah, I think coordinating services and helping people find those service systems that are going to be helpful. This is a little summary of the deciding together process. This is a rubric, if you will, of how do we get from starting a plan, wondering about what services we provide, things like that. We really start out with goals. So it's focusing on, what are the goals for this child now and in the future? So some of our goals might be really future focused. Some of them are going to be right now, but we really start out with goals, because then we can kind of help everybody, help the family and help the team plug in what services, what resources are out there to help meet those goals. And this is the process in which we do that. And then, developing the plan and evaluating it. So we, at a minimum, every 6 months, evaluate a plan to see how are things working? What do we need to tweak? What do we need to add? What do we take away? And more often if needed, of course. Here's where we're going to talk a little bit about transition planning. And along the lines with deciding together and the goals, we say it at age 14. However, we know that lots of transitions happen before then too. So throughout time, we're really working on transitions in very different ways. A child preparing to go to school for the first time, that's a transition. What supports, might be needed for that transition. But here at age 14, we really are talking about like future planning. And, we start to really talk about in the next 4 years, what are some of those goals that you'd like to see, happen, and what services are going to help meet those goals. Maybe we look at additional daily living skills. Maybe we look at, a target range of when DVR is referred, or practicing some of those skills before we're looking at a job to build up those job readiness skills. What does independence look like? What types of services will help with that? We're going to start talking about decision making and legal planning. It seems early at 14, however, that time goes fast. And so we're going to talk about, and at 14, it might look very different than at 17, but we're going to start talking about what are we thinking? What options do we want to look into more? Where can we find those options and start to look at, looking at those a little bit more? Thinking about health planning, right? There's a lot that, at 14, kids are often signing their own releases. And what does that mean? And, medical planning, things like that. What kinds of things, if somebody has routine medical care, can they start to do independently? What do they still need help with? education. I know that with IEP goals, well, that's a big age with transition planning and IEPs. So, and that's another thing support service coordinators can do too. If parents invite us, we can go to IEP meetings. And I think that's always a nice, um, you know, full team um, service that, when schools and community services and, everybody can come together with that. And coordinate, what are some areas that we can help out with too. And so we're going to work on that from age 14 to 17 and keep continuing those conversations. And then at 17, we really start to look at, okay, now we're a year before 18. And so we want to talk again, eligibility and termination. We're going to talk about types of Medicaid that somebody might get at 18. So we're going to help families navigate thinking about that. At what month of this year do we want to start looking at that? Different types of Medicaid will require different actions and some will not at all. And we're going to want to look at, do we want to look at a different type of Medicaid? Do we do that now? So we're going to walk families through that part of the process. A significant thing that people are really thinking about is legal decision making. What does that look like? Do we want to look into supported decision making and start filling out that paperwork? When people are asking about guardianship, we really want to talk about pros and weigh the options with guardianship. What are what are the things we want to think about with that, and what does that mean now and the future, and what types of decision making things does that impact for the youth, and if that is the right pathway, then parents can look into making that appointment with a doctor, and we'll work with parents to kind of give them that time frame. But we also look at all options, you know. Um, and, if, in helping youth that, um, if who might be at high risk vulnerable status, really kind of teaming that transition, if you will. And then the other big piece too is referring the youth and their family to the ADRC. So when participants are involved with CLTS, we can refer them at 17 and a half. Oftentimes they start the process at 17 years and 9 months. But we can refer families for that, and we work with the ADRC in that process, and we'll stay open with that youth if they're eligible for adult services. We stay open until they transition into whatever long-term care option they have chosen. If they're not eligible, then we get to keep them open. But we really kind of help prepare families for that and work with the ADRC in that role. And that's what's nice when somebody's open with CLTS is we get to start that prior to 18. If somebody's not open, then they start that process at 18. So we get a little bit of leeway with that when people are open with CLTS. And that is, I know we have time for questions now too, but more contact information.
Thank you, Angela. I'm going to remove your spotlight. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording so that people can feel free to ask questions and explain a little bit. Thank you. That's exactly what we were asking for, was this overview of how people, if they aren't already enrolled in CLTS, could get enrolled in CLTS, because we've noticed that there's some families that are coming into high school that have not yet been referred to CLTS, and that's a little bit troublesome. So we want to make sure that our families in middle school and in high school have the information if they haven't received it already, along with everybody's afraid of what's not afraid, but looking ahead. And so thank you for pointing us to the transition planning and how CLTS can really support a family and youth as they look ahead. Let me stop the recording. Thank you very much. And then we'll open it up for questions.